right. Getting some chat going.
Yeah.
So, you may have seen some information about this, obviously, because some of you decided to show up, and you're wondering, what?
What is this thing?
What is this thing?
Yeah.
So by way of introduction,
That's a bad question to
I'm Roy
ask.
Atkinson. If you don't know which one of us is whom, and with us we have Patti Blackstaffe and Simone Jo Moore and Greg Sanker. And we've been having conversations via this platform for quite a while. And we just decided to make it a little bit more formal and open and transparent. And we're going to be talking about lots of stuff. And there are some topics we won't be talking about today. And
do not mention them.
Yes. Don't mention the war, as it says in Faulty Towers.
Yes.
So we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to talk about working from home. We're not going to talk about current health situations. We're going to incorporate some of that into what we're talking about. But basically, this is going to be a conversation about where we are and where we're going as we think about these things. And so we welcome all of you. You can tweet questions, comments with the hashtag KTLO Learn, and we'll be looking at that. And you can post questions in the chat. We'll be looking at the chat periodically. So we titled this first episode, "The Day the Earth Did Not Stand Still." That was Simone's idea. And why don't we start there and discuss a little bit about why you decided to think about that as a topic for today, Simone?
Well, the interesting thing for me is, I've always liked the sci-fi movies. I always thought Gort was a pretty cool robot, and the movie itself was great. And but there's other meanings too. It's for many of us, with all the changes that are happening, and sometimes we want to say, "Stop the world, let me get off." Unfortunately, the world doesn't stop; it just keeps spinning for us. And so I think there's a deeper human issue that happens when we think about all the stuff that occurs to us and what that actually means in leadership, what it means to our people, how we interact and support our people in the organization, because quite frankly, the earth just doesn't stand still.
True story. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just kind of been waves and waves of responses and reactions that people have had, and I think it's worth starting out with a recognition that as human beings, when we deal with change, and this is definitely change, we respond to it on a lot of different levels. And I know that in corporations or in organizations that have a job to get done, there might be an overemphasis on, hey, let's get you up and going and get you back to normal. Let's get hey, Orian, let's get you doing what you used to be doing. And I feel that it to some degree it does a disservice, because you're either going to cross this path, once and do a good job of it, or you're going to come back and do it again at some point in the future. And so I think we need to.
You're not the same.
Right, exactly.
You're not the same inside your head. You're not the same inside just your perspective anymore because of the experience that you've had. So how can I go back to being normal? Because my normal is now different.
Yeah.
And there is a continuum of human response that happens as we are faced with change. And of course, everyone is in a different place in that human response of how they're feeling about what's going on and their ability to move through that change from denial to acceptance to experimentation to and where they go and where they move. And I think there's a real need for the understanding of the emotional intelligence and the compassion that is needed right now on the leadership side, not just how do I deal with it as a person, but how do I help others deal with it, right? Yeah. So, and that's exponential change across the board. We're seeing that.
So I hadn't heard you use that term before, Patti, but as a pseudo technologist, and I say pseudo because it's been a long time since I've done anything remotely technical, but it implies kind of a mathematical model almost of approaching it. Say more about that.
So when you're talking about exponential change, it's obviously the rate at which we move through changes and how they're impacted. So it used to be that humans would have a need and then technology would fill the need. We're seeing exponential technological advances that are actually shifting us to meet the technology. And so that's a different dynamic than, say, where we were in the 70s and 80s. And suddenly in the last little while, and we're not going to talk about the health issues, but I do want to talk about the technology, right? I do want to say that there are some things that have moved forward by years because of the need to move forward by years. So in the last 3 years, we've seen technology just go and go and go and go. And we're like, yeah, come on board. Yeah, come on board. And suddenly now it's everyone has to be on board, right? Everyone has to be on board because they're being asked to behave and react differently with their organizations.
So, good, Ray.
You touched on something there, Patti, that I've been thinking about a lot. And, there's this tremendous conversation about working remotely, working from home, all of that. There were a lot of organizations before this that said, well, we can't do that. Our situation is different. We're special. We can't have people working from home for whatever reasons. Now they have to. Yeah. And so we've broken that barrier. And a lot of other barriers have happened. And when we were talking about doing this earlier on, my analogy for the day the earth didn't stand still was that we are traveling in a car. We don't have our seatbelts on. Let's say this is the 1950s and we're not wearing any seatbelts and the dashboard is made of metal and the car suddenly stops and we smash into the dashboard.
I have a scar right here for that very...
There you go.
I still have a dent from when I was actually on a boat once and the wave went one way and I went the other.
I'm not sure that's from the boat accident, Simone.
So, but I guess my point is that this has hit us in ways we didn't expect.
Yeah.
And we've hit the dashboard and here we are and we're trying to get our bearings back and so forth. So this is, we expected change. We were talking for a long time about the fact that AI was going to take all our jobs. Well, guess what? It ain't AI that's doing it. It's something entirely different. Yeah. And this is the kind of things that happen. The John Lennon saying, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And here we are. We're in this situation now, and I think we're all trying to muddle our way through and do the best we can. But let's see how
I kind of think I've already got a few scars. What's a few more?
Yeah.
Well, so one of the things that I've talked about in some of my speaking roles is digital transformation. And of course, we're almost done hearing digital transformation, right? So I go to Charles Araujo's definition because it was really helpful to me as a long-term technologist that he said that digital transformation is two fundamental things. It's a basic core level fundamental shift in business models, which has nothing to do with technologies. And it's about a shifting of power away from organizations or centricity and distributing it out, especially to customers. So in that sense, this is a digital transformation thing, right? Because we fundamentally, overnight or over a period of time, recognize that our business models of everything that we do, conferences, speaking, learning, business travel, making relationships with other folks and whatnot.
You're making me tired with that list.
Well, the thing is, well, let me get to the other piece. Is there's been a shift of power, and it's a fascinating way to look at it, because it used to be that we would go to college or university, get our degree, go to it, where all the authority was with the organization. We would go to work for a company where all the authority was with the company, and we would work that job or go through a series of jobs within that organization or other
It's
organizations.
all been democratized. Yeah.
Exactly.
And what we do and how we do it just took a shift. Right. Yeah.
But the thing that I want to really add, though, Patti, is that it's really occurred to me as I've been thinking the last couple of weeks about this, is all of this has been here for probably as far as 20 years, definitely 10 years. And so there's a very real extent that power holders have held on to this falsehood of power or the ability to control things. Yeah. And now the genie's out of the bag. Pandora's box is open, and it's not going to go back.
Well, I there are, as a change practitioner, I connect humans with technology, right? So that's what I do. And when we talk about how to create adoption and utilization and what the resistance is, and we had talked about this earlier this week, Greg, Roy, and Simone, we talked about necessity is the mother of invention, and how we as humans are willing to accept a change when we are forced to accept that change. And there are a ton of people who have said, no, that's not going to happen in our organization. No, and there are all these trust issues. And now we're having to flip the dime of leadership who have made those decisions in the past to now say, oh, you know what, maybe I was wrong. Maybe we should have been prepared for this. Maybe that should have been where we focused our time and our energy.
This is the thing with a lot of the time we come into an organization and we're inheriting not just the technology, someone else's, legacy systems in terms of the technology, but it's actually the legacy of the decisions that have been made.
Absolutely.
The legacy processes, the legacy contracts, the legacy, the legacy culture, whatever it is, but it's somebody else's decisions that we've walked into.
Yeah.
And there's something we have to balance there.
Right. Yeah. And how often do we challenge those things around us? Like, the story is told of Thanksgiving Day, cut the end off the ham and put it into the pan and put it in the oven. And the kid says, I'll tell that story really quickly for those of you who heard it before, is Mom, why do we do that? And Mom says, I don't know. And ask her Mom, why do we cut the end off the ham? I don't know. Ask my mom, all the generations that are there. And Grandma says, because we didn't have a pan large enough. And so we keep cutting the ends off of a ham organizationally and through our processes and our practices and the way we think about things and perceive things, when in fact the reason for that no longer exists, but we haven't challenged it.
Yeah.
Just for those, if you're not following the chat, I'll just say it. Doug just put in the chat that we're on a train someone else built.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting way to put it, that we didn't have a hand in constructing this. And this is true of life in general, right? It goes whether we're doing stuff or not. And so we do the best we can. We're here paddling along.
Turning.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't stop turning for us to get off and say, wow, is that the wrong train? Do I like this train? Is it going somewhere where I want to go?
And typically IT is loading a moving train, right? We don't often get an opportunity to stop, right?
Like, quick,
we're loading that sucker as it's going down the track.
No, Patti, I don't know where you've been in IT, but for me, I've been changing the wheels under a moving train as we're accelerating. That's what I've been doing.
Yeah, you're our Mission Impossible guy. You're the one that's actually hanging on underneath.
Yeah, and I'm getting a little old for that gig,
So just a quick note about logistics here. We were hoping to be able to live stream this on YouTube today. We couldn't do that. We will probably do that in the future, but we will upload the video from this to YouTube later on, and it will be available on the KTLO Learning channel. So we'll send that link out on Twitter and LinkedIn and so forth. So
actually, I like what Doug has said here, because I came back to him with that analogy and I just asked him, are you a passenger, the conductor, or the driver of this train? And he said, well, that's the issue, because some people are really reluctant to choose and they prefer just to be along for the ride. And I mean, if you want to go along for the ride, go for it. It could be a really interesting journey. It could end up being a fun journey. You could be sitting next to the dream person of your life. Who knows?
So did you see the comment from Orian just now? Because I think she's onto something really important here, something that I talk about a fair amount, and that is we have a generation right now that's coming into the workforce, and they don't accept what was. They want to know why. In fact, I had an MBA candidate who reached out to me and said, I'd like to talk about working in your organization. And I get this a lot. You know, people want to come over and basically pitch themselves. And I said, well, let me talk to you about, you know, the opportunities we have here. And she goes, no, stop. I want to understand who you are as a leader, what your organization is about, and what the mission of your organization is, before she even wanted to know about any possibility of working here. Why? Because this generation, they want to be part of something that they fundamentally believe in. It's very different than the previous generation that wanted a job. I wanted an opportunity to use their skills to do something, earn a living, etc.
They want to see a purpose.
Let's see if that survives the current situation, though.
Well,
let's see if that attitude survives the current situation.
I was just going to say, I bet you there's an awful lot of organizations that are now questioning what their mission is. Because, you know, for myself, I was thinking about some other questions that have cropped up for me about what I'm actually enjoying doing. What am I most grateful for? What am I actually on the right path myself?
Right.
It's interesting, though. I've seen lots of tweets, Simone, and different comments online and social media saying we're keeping score. We're looking at what businesses are doing. We're looking at how they're caring about their organization.
Exactly.
We will remember. And that's a fascinating flip from when I entered the workforce. Fascinating.
So, I can't cite the leader who wrote this, and that's probably all right. But the idea that the way organizations are behaving right now in this current crisis is setting the tone that you're going to be living with organizationally for 10, probably 20 years or more. In other words, people are watching you when you're in a situation where maybe you're not at your best. So one of the things that we had talked about that I wanted to bring up was, you know, the idea that if your world stopped when this all happened, then my question would be, do you really understand what your mission is? If your world literally came to a grinding halt, are you clear of what your personal mission is and what you're about? And the idea is that if the world fundamentally shifts or changes, or you have these new obstacles that you haven't dealt with, but you're clear what your mission is, you can still achieve that mission. In other words, the fact that we're all quarantined or working remotely doesn't stop you from being a person who empowers others, educates others, uplifts others, builds relationships with others, or whatever it is that you're fundamentally about.
See, it's really interesting because when you think about, you know, what is it that you value, and it's not necessarily, it could be the next ability to go out the door and do some shopping or get your next glass of wine even.
But it is later in France, isn't it? Fine, be that way.
Later in the day in France.
Well, hey, you know, you could always have Baileys in your coffee. I don't know. Hey, you see, sanity in a cup. Who knows?
Sanity.
Yeah, I don't know. Sanity is Patti.
Well,
you know, Claire asked a good question. How many people, after this sense of freedom, and I have to say, there is a sense of freedom in what's going on, because, you know, we might be under certain guidelines and rules and all the rest of it, but we now have some freedom to explore a new way of being. And I mean of being. Yes. And not just a new way of working. I mean, and how many people... there is no going back to the norm after this, because it has fundamentally changed the way people see things and the way they feel things, or not necessarily change the way they feel things. Maybe they're actually discovering the feelings that were underneath. They've actually taken some of the onion layers off, and other stuff is now they're becoming aware now more than ever.
There is also a piece of the coin whereby leaders are going to, so I'm just looking at Doug's comment, which is really interesting. There's comfort in leadership inertia for the leader. So But there are a lot of organizations. I've done some consulting just this year with an organization that absolutely you cannot work from home. There is no work from home policy. We need to see you in the door every day.
Yep.
But they are all being forced to work from home right now. And I would imagine that when this is finished, that we're going to see a whole bunch of people being asked through the leadership to go back to the old normal. And I think the important thing here that we talk about is how do we manage that between leaders who believed in the old normal and their workers who are absolutely saying no. Now, we weren't going to talk a lot about work from home, but this is more about leadership and more about organizational shifts, right?
Yes.
We're talking about an absolutely new normal that people are getting used to.
Yeah.
There are families that would love to be able to keep their kids at home and be able to work from home so that they can do that and save a little bit more money and avoid the transportation costs, and organizations that are going to, light bulbs will go on and say, holy cow, we can reduce our costs by X number of dollars because we did this shift. And then we're going to have organizations that are going to have a hard time. Yeah, serious. That are going to have a hard,
Kazi has made an interesting comment here too, that, some people have spent their whole lives building their business. And I mean, that means that, all the blood, sweat and tears that goes into that. So they're going to find it hard to let go and rethink on certain levels, which is an interesting thing. So, whether they as leaders, or is it going to be the people in the organization that are going to help them rethink? I think it's an interesting point.
Or will it be people from outside the organization that help them rethink? And is that an opportunity for those of us who are in the consulting world? Or, I think that's a big, interesting question.
I think so.
Yeah. And Doug's comment about leadership inertia, because that's, maybe if I stand still long enough, it's, everything
will go away and we can get back to what I'm used to.
Come back to stasis, and it's like, hey, the earth doesn't stand still.
And one of the elements that I see where I work that I'm not going to say on this recording for obvious reasons is just this idea in the senior leadership, especially, that I get that the world has to change. I get that we have to change in culture and blah, 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 blah. And that's the attitude. That's why I use that. I'm channeling that. And it's the next generation is going to do that. I just going to make it to retirement, 2 years, 4 years, whatever. If I can just keep the world, use my position or my authority or whatever influence I have to keep things the way they are until something changes, that would be just fine. And here's what I think, and I almost wish we could take Claire off of mute, but I think there's a lot of brilliant people who are coming up out of this environment and saying, I'm going to start a company, I'm going to run an organization from the heart, or through what I am passionate about or what I think is important. And they attract people that are similarly driven by excellence, and they build new organizations. So they don't have to change anything. They don't have to change what was, or change the leaders, or get people to think new. They just get smart people together and they do something that's really, truly awesome. Thanks, Claire.
So Speaking of which, do we want to unmute everybody and have a little interaction here for a little bit of time?
I think we've got 10 people all together, including us. So I think we can certainly do that. And away you go, Master Roy.
You are off mute, everybody.
Welcome,
Thanks
everybody.
for coming.
Hey, Mark Thomas here. Thanks for letting me listen in, guys. I snuck in on you when I saw 2 tweets come out by Simone and Greg Sanker, 2 of my favorite tweeters. I appreciate it, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Hey, you have to do something about that photograph, Mark. It does not go with the beard.
Oh, there you are.
The beard is gone. The beard is gone.
My God.
The beard is gone.
Just after we did all that filming.
Yeah.
Oh, my God. I can't believe it.
So,
I had to take it off.
Since we got you off mute, Mark, here, I'm going to turn the tables on you here, dude.
No,
because
don't do that.
you've been cranking out more material in the last 3 weeks than I've personally seen. And I know that you're constantly traveling around the world, consulting and doing great things. But in terms of developing content, you've been prolific. I don't know when you sleep, Mark. So tell me about that. Tell me about being productive in this lockdown mode.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's interesting. As I was listening to you guys, I was thinking back 2 years ago, and one of the things that I thought about was I'm a single person company, and I did these risk scenarios, and this is where I think what we can start doing is looking at risk scenarios moving forward. So 2 years ago, I did risk scenarios. I said, I'm a single person organization. What are the highest levels of risk that could affect my business? Number one was my health. Right. If I'm a single person organization, if I get sick or ill, that is a real scenario. Likelihood, I think, is, it goes up as I get older. Impact is devastating. So what did I do to respond to that? Right. I try to eat healthier. I tried to drink more wine. I heard that earlier.
You just reminded me.
but I get physicals and so on. The second thing was another black swan event that could prevent me from traveling because the boards that I work with, you have to be standing in front of that board in order for you to co-create value with them. Right. So I invested heavily 2 years ago in 2 studios. I have a studio here. I'm sitting in Kansas, and I have a studio in Phoenix, Arizona. And so I started producing a lot of the things that the results of the work. So I was somewhat prepared for what's taking place right now. Right now, what's taking place in the market has not really impacted me significantly. So I think one of the things is, well, what are the risks moving forward? I don't know what those are. I have to sit down and say, okay, under today's environment, what are the risks? Do we lose engagement? Do we lose, do our clients move funding from consulting and training to other areas? And this core group of experts, right, knows that better than everybody else. So that's my perspective. And I think that's what's going through my head right now, because so many people are working at home. We have you guys know I'm pretty deep on the cyber side. Right now, what we're fighting the Zoom attackers. I don't know if you guys have read. My wife is dean of the University in Kansas, and the concern is that people. There was a situation at Arizona State University, a professor teaching a class. Somebody basically jumped in, hacked into their Zoom session, and started displaying vulgar and extremely, very offensive things to the entire class. So anyway, those are the things. It's a whole new set of risks we're dealing with. But I made a comment earlier, and I will yield my remaining time to the rest of the group. But I made a comment that I talked to just a couple people the other day, and they said, I have gone from basically a 9 to 5 in the office to I work 24/7, but I don't do 12 hours a day. I may get 8 to 10 hours a day, but I'll work at 11 and so on. And an interesting thing is I did have one client that reached out and said, "What do I do here?" One of their employees they'd gone virtual, and their employee was on Facebook, and she was posting pictures of being at some type of little virtual festival at like 2 PM. And they're like, "Well, you know what? This person's working virtually. I'm paying them, and they're off at some kind of deal posting about it." And I said, "Man, you have to shift. You have to shift. Right. Is that person producing what you need for them to produce? If she produces it at 2 AM, you have succeeded." Right. I think that whole idea of you got to be in the office, I think this is gone. And you guys know, and I heard this earlier, we're not going back to normal. Like everybody used to say, travel. Everybody here on this call travels often. None of us have never heard, oh, that was pre 9/11. Right. And so the travel industry completely changed. So now the way we work today is going to be pre-virus, post-virus.
I think those are really important conversations, and we've been talking for a long time. Performance does not equal attendance, right? And performance, and that's a really important conversation, because performance should be about deliverables. Like, what are you executing? What are you giving me? How are we finishing this? Where are we getting to? If we've got performance tied to outcomes as opposed to performance tied to attendance, we're going to get the new talent, because that's how the new talent works.
That's exactly right.
That's the other thing when I think about the way I've worked as an independent as well and moving around to the various clients. Yeah, a lot of travel because there's certain things that, we're face to face and hey, we're humans. We like that kind of connection. It's really cool. It's really cool. Yeah. But there are times because I'm working in different time zones, whether I'm working with Australia and New Zealand or if I'm working with the US or, working in the different places in Europe. So, I could be working at 3 a.m. But that's okay because if I'm working at 3 a.m. doing something, I'm going to sleep in until 11,
Yeah.
So it takes some, you still have to self-care. You still have to think about, have I worked a normal time? Because, and you know what? Sometimes I don't because, and this is the value thing when we're talking about productivity and what Doug was saying in the chat, it's, this productivity thing, especially when you're being creative, man, sometimes you are in that zone and you're there for hours and you forget everything else. And it's an amazing
power time,
experience.
Right?
Yeah.
Power time.
It's an amazing feeling to do that.
And
I tell you what. Yeah, but if you have to get up, if you have to, someone standing in front of your desk or, this sort of thing, those distractions, regardless of what they are, that's exactly what they do. They take you away from the traction.
But let's get down to leadership here. If you're managing your team through Microsoft Stats, you have a leadership problem. You don't have a team problem.
Yeah.
If you're worried about who's online when, you have a leadership problem, not a team problem.
Oops.
One of the things I've found interesting is, sorry, this is Orian speaking. One of the things I found interesting is just the patterns of how we work and how we're responding to change. It's been very interesting to see how routines are starting to emerge where people will communicate at set times a day, and there is a shift, probably in line with what people have been asking for from the industry, which is a focus on value. We're no longer looking at outputs of how many emails you do or how many calls you make, but it's the calls that count. It comes down to that performance versus attendance conversation that you were just having. The change is a dramatic shift, and I think it's very much on point with what industry is looking for at the minute. This is just a proof in the pudding.
If you look, go ahead.
Sorry, Mark. Greg and I have been having conversations for a long time about the concept of playing the game you're in. Your organization is in some kind of a game, and you play that game, not somebody else's game. You don't try to rubber stamp what they're doing to make what you're doing better. But we have to also consider that individually. I agree with the idea of being productive at various times whenever that's comfortable for us and et cetera. But we really have to realize that a lot of people can't do that. Salespeople, for example, have to have one-to-one conversations with the people that they're dealing with. And we struggle with it just in the core group here. Patti and Greg and Simone and I struggle with time zones, right? Just trying to make sure that where I am and where you are is not ridiculous. We all struggle with getting email in the middle of the night, and maybe we're partially awake and the phone goes blink, and we look and there's an email from somebody that's important to us, maybe our boss. Well, are we supposed to read that and look at it now?
That depends on how important that person is.
Yeah, well, exactly. That's exactly true. So, but you're still making those judgments, So there has to be a tremendous amount of flexibility here, and I
think this comes back to something. I think this. Well, when you said that, we've got to play the game that we're in, and it's really interesting, is that sometimes we haven't been taught certain moves and how to play that game. So, if I was playing tennis right now, sometimes I whack that ball so hard it goes into someone else's court, not just the one I'm playing in. So this is. Well, and that's what you do. But it kind of, what you were saying there really makes me one of my favorite topics, and I'm going to say this phrase because I love it.
I know what you're going to say.
Psychological safe space.
Yes, but it's also creativity, right? We can get creative about that. I worked for an organization for years where they said, listen, if we're going to be in line with meetings with our clients or whatever, let's make those meetings between 11 and 3, and the rest of the time is yours. Let's figure that out. Let's be creative as a team as to what's necessary, right? When it comes to how your role plays out, we don't have to play it out from a 9 to 5 just because that's our role, right? We need to get creative about what those conversations look like and help develop that together as a group.
And, I think our roles have blended too. I think those of us that have been, that flit about the way that we have done amongst the countries and across the ether as we do, that sometimes our roles blend. So, there's an interesting facet where there's been a lot of guff about making sure that we have the right boundaries and those sorts of things. And I'm not saying there doesn't have to be there, but there's a new sense of blending or blurring of lines that's now happening with people. And I'm just wondering, with the leadership showing more vulnerability, leadership showing that they're actually human, which I believe they should, because, quite frankly, whether you walk through a physical door at work or whether it's because you happen to be on the screen and, oh, I'm sorry, one of my kids just wandered by, or the cat just decided to jump on my lap. You don't leave your emotions at home. They're part of who you are. And in fact, if we want to say we want innovative people, creative people, we want this kind of talent, and you walk in and they've got these big giant signs that say that this is who we are, and the next thing you know, they've got, they're punishing people by this micromanagement, and you're like, stop denying the whole person, because that is where the talent comes from.
So
from the whole.
Yeah. So this was not in my notes or thoughts about this, but some of you know that I've been studying David Snowden's work on Cynefin, which I had to research how to pronounce that thing, because to the American tongue, that's a Cynefin. Apologies, Dave, if you ever tune into this.
Oh God,
But let me summarize it just really, really quickly. And I'm not preaching on this because it is very relevant. There's the 4 kind of areas in which we have to do decision making: simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. Those are the 4, and they're not exactly quadrants, and he emphasizes that. But in circumstances where things are simple, there's a very clear tie between cause and effect, meaning actions and reactions. And the idea is, in there, you determine what's happening, you categorize it, and you act on it in terms of how do we respond to this? Best practice. And up here in the complicated, you may have to do some analysis between sensing and responding, because it's maybe a little more complicated than that. And that's where experts come in. And if you flop over into complex, you have to do some active probing of what is actually happening here before we sense and then respond. And then chaotic is you've got to take some actions to try to figure this thing out, because it's not behaving in any rational fashion. Here's where I think that's important to what we're talking about. And that is, thanks for spelling it right, Roy. And that is where leadership especially, but individuals do this as well, is if we're applying the wrong thought processes in a given situation. In other words, we're responding as if it's a simple situation. In other words, sense, categorize, and respond. And where I think about that is, if you're at your desk, if you're visibly typing away on your computer, then the simple is, because you're at your desk typing, I believe that you're doing your job. Whereas in a more complicated thing, I have to do some sensing and some analysis. Are you doing the right things? Are you doing them equality, et cetera, et cetera? And so the emphasis is lifted off of it's a simple thing. If you're sitting, you're doing your job. If you're not, then you're lazing out. And if you get into things that are complex, which a lot of the world is, it takes a very different skill set. And I think for a lot of us we're so used to doing what we've always done that we treat the world as if it's simple, when in fact it could be complicated, complex, or even chaotic. And I think that's where leadership has to be adaptive to what is the situation that's in front of it.
Good points, Greg. And we've got a very specific question from Alfredo. Hi, Alfredo. Nice to see you here. Alfredo is a few miles from me here in South Carolina. Which one has an advantage right now as a job seeker? A freelancer or a full-timer or that's a really, really interesting question. And I think we're not going to know that. I'm just thinking here. I don't think we're going to know that until we come out of this and there's some type of economic indicators that one way or the other, it probably really depends on the industry. In our case, in the IT service management world, which most of us are in one way or another, I think it could go either way. And I think that it depends on how the organizations that we've been working for are set up to handle the new reality.
Yes, I agree.
I mean, I think we're all agreed that things are not going back to quote unquote normal as in the way they were before this happened, because this has forced a rethink and the world didn't stop, right? Simone, your analogy. And so we're going to have to adjust to that. But I think it serves us to pay attention to how particular organizations are performing and how they're going to come out of this, because this is going to have a huge impact, already has. Right?
Oh, massive.
I have a perspective on this, actually, and I've been watching this probably over the last 20 years. And so many folks on this call may have started, as I did, in a very, very large global consulting firm. And you guys might remember 20 years ago when we had what was called the Big Six. And so what we would do is, I was at Anderson, and so later Accenture. But anyway, the whole deal was we would put teams of generalist consultants in your organization, and we would charge you for that. And you there was a product and there was a service that came out of that. But what we've seen over the last 20 years, and you guys may have heard me say this before, is don't major in minors, which means we have seen.
I love
and
that.
That's what we did. And quote it, hashtag Mark Thomas. And so anyway,
check it out on KTLO Learn.
But what we've seen is we have a huge industry of individual independent experts who have majored in a major. And so what I'm seeing now is organizations are contracting with or engaging with individual experts because we want somebody who's laser sharp in a specific skill, just like everybody on this call. I believe, and I don't know if this is good or bad, but it's helpful for any independent person. And I've seen this trend over 20 years. We're starting to see that independent freelancers who have a major are becoming extremely valuable to people because we want that sharp skill. That's my piece.
So I'm mixed on that one because, that's why I call myself a mixologist, because I think exactly.
That is not why you came up with that term.
No, don't tell that story.
Yeah, sorry.
But I'm more that T-shaped professional because I used to major in one specific area. I used to be, that laser focused in one particular area. And what I discovered is that it limited me. I found that it, and I don't mean from being able to sell my skill set and be relevant. I just felt that it limited the way I saw things, the way I focused on how I worked. So having some of the generalist skills, like I couldn't program my way out of a wet paper bag anymore, but I used to. Do you see what I mean? So
there's an understanding of you cross over into other areas, and that's normal. You have to be able to cross over into other areas.
I think you have to be able to have that blending on the edges, that where you understand where it fits into the scheme of things. Because some of the majors, I found that they're so insular in what they're focused on, and they seriously just can't see the tangents, can't see their way out of it.
You just uncovered the secret, right? Because I will not engage with somebody unless they're an expert at something. I'm not going to call out and say, I need a generalist, but if I engage with you as an expert, now you are a trusted advisor to me. Yeah. And I say, oh, I need something. You're like, hey, I do that too. I'm like, you do that too? Right? So you have created a beachhead into my organization because you're a specialist, but you are a generalist, right? So it depends on your altitude, right? When you're a programmer, you were a specialist in a specific language, but as you grew professionally, now you would be more of an expert at a different domain. And that domain, let's say I call myself an IT governance expert, and you're like, that's pretty broad, but I'm an expert at that domain. Right.
Yeah.
So other folks do the same kind of thing. IT service management, right? Those things. I think you just uncovered the secret, right? That is your entry point in, hey, we're experts. I'm an expert, but I can also do 1,000 other things for you.
It's interesting. I saw a stat go by this week, and I wish I could quote it and had kept it so I can throw it in the link, but it was 34% of workers are gig economy right now in the United States. And when I take a look at that stat, how scientific or accurate it is, I can't guarantee, but I would venture a guess it's pretty big, because the trend in corporate is to hire consultants or contractors, which they're also considering part of that gig economy. If that's the case, we need to take a look at what organizations may or may not be doing in terms of what light bulbs went on because now people are working from home. Does that mean I can remove benefits? Does that mean I can remove these things and take away certain employee, I know, right? But we have to take a look at that. So Alfredo, I think what Roy said is there are no guarantees, because we don't know how we're going to come out of this and what organizations are going to do. We don't want to see them doing that. But on the other hand, we have democratized so much of our capabilities, and people now have the tools that the big guys held tightly in their hands for a long time for individuals to actually ramp up their own abilities. The trick here, though, is to not worry as much about the organization, but to worry about you individually. How am I building my career? How am I learning? What am I learning? Am I on a constant, keep the learning on path where I have a growth mindset and I think about what's coming in the future? When you look at how fast things are moving, the idea is that you are the champion of your career. Don't wait for your company to put you in that role. You've got to figure
and you know what?
out
Be the eye of the storm.
Yes.
Even with the storm whizzing around you, you stand in the middle of that. It's spinning. It's moving so fast. But that calmness that comes from within you when you feel that you are actually doing the right things
personal
for you.
Personal control of place yourself.
And I think that's the real search, is finding that calmness in the storm within you. And there's a certain strength that comes from having faith in what you're able to do, and knowing who you are and what you can do about things, and also the ability to let go. And maybe I will stick my foot out in the wind there a little bit and see where it takes me, just because there's okay, I've sort of done what I had. Now maybe there's a little new adventure just waiting around the corner, and it doesn't have to be a huge one. It just might be just taking that next step outside.
I'm going to tie something that Patti said there back to something that Greg said earlier. And Patti, you talked about a power shift. And Greg, earlier you were quoting Charlie Araujo on digital transformation. And Charlie describes it on the podcast interview that I did with Charlie. I asked him specifically, how do you think about digital transformation? He said one of the big elements is the shift of power from the organization to the consumer, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's huge. You put the power right here with the consumer, and things have changed entirely. And it's that same kind of power shift where now we as individuals, look at the tools we're using today. We're using social media. We're using a powerful video conferencing tool, et cetera, et cetera. We have those tools. We can be individual organizations. And so we have more power than we did. And organizations have less, maybe. So, but in any case, the dynamic is shifting rapidly And the current situation that we have in the world has really accelerated that, kicked it in the teeth, slapped it into the dashboard of the car, however we want to look at it. It's undeniable things have now changed. How do we respond to that? And again, another interview I did recently was with Ben Brennan from QTSAC. And Ben said he talks with his team all the time about finding the opportunity in chaos. And I think that's exactly where we are now, is finding that opportunity in chaos. I believe that comes from Churchill. And so let's talk a little bit about some of those opportunities. Some of them have bubbled up as we've been conversing. Certainly having discussions like this, and they're happening all over the place right now. I mean, Zoom conversations and other virtual conversations are happening everywhere all the time. And so how do we take this chaos and turn it into an opportunity? And what from going back to, again, to you, Greg, what do we take from that quadrant that is Cynefin and say we're in chaos? How do we try to wrap our brains around it and make sense of it and get to somewhere we need to be?
Well, thank you. That's actually really good setup, because the one fundamental unique aspect of the chaos quadrant, and I'm not a practitioner of Cynefin. I'm not, and I'm just learning, and as soon as I can, I'm going to try to go get some formal training. Let's just say that. But the one unique factor about chaos is that there are no right answers. There are no predefined answers, and so you have to act first, like, I'm standing here, I've got to do something. And so I do something, and then I say, oh, now I have some data. That didn't work, pivot and go somewhere else. You have to create some data. You have to actually kind of sense, what are the rules of this new chaotic environment?
There are no rules.
There are no rules. But I think
there may be, but we don't know what they are yet.
I think we need to separate the concepts of motion and action. Motion is not action, right? So we can busy ourselves with getting through, or we can act. And I think that from the human standpoint and the reactionary standpoint of change, we have to look at four things. What are we keeping? What's important? What are we keeping? What stayed the same so that I can still live in my comfort zone? I don't have to suffer through grief or loss, and what's really going away? Like, is there anything going away that's really worth hanging on to as we move through this new thing? And then what's new, and what do I have to do differently? Yeah. And I think if we can look at those four things, and we can take a look at how to move away from grief and loss, because people, you have two types of people. You have the people who can say, okay, I see an opportunity, and you have another type of people that say, oh my God, my world has just changed and I don't know how to handle it. We have to be able to understand what we're keeping and what we're losing, and whether they're really even valuable to care about.
Actually, there's even a step before that, I think, especially from a leadership perspective. I was talking about the whole person before, and what that means and what they bring to that. And working in Cynefin for me is an extremely incredible approach. I don't get boxed in by the fact that they happen to be represented in boxes, right? Because they're not.
They're not, exactly.
They are not.
And he's cleared on that.
Exactly. But the really cool thing is that, we have to acknowledge that it's okay to be not okay. We don't want people to stay there, but we do have to, sometimes you have to feel the feeling for a little bit. But as leaders and as facilitators, not just leaders, but to facilitate that person to move through that, I think is really important. But one of the things, like, the next person that said to me, oh, just buck up your ideas and, it'll all be right in the morning and things like that. Seriously, I just...
Yeah, that defies human nature. That is not...
That is not helpful. What is, I agree with what you have, but I think there's that little step where we have to, the people that are needing to feel
we have to acknowledge pain.
Yeah.
We have to start by acknowledging the pain.
Exactly.
Absolutely. We have to, and we've had a conversation earlier this week, Greg, with another group, or last week, that was similar, where we talked about acknowledging the pain.
Yeah.
and there is pain through transition. I know Maya Angelou calls it meantime, which is a phrase that I absolutely love to take on, because we are in meantime. We're in the meantime.
Yeah.
We're going to do these things. We're going to figure out where we land, right? And that's something that we have to acknowledge, that we don't have the answers right now to what the future looks like, but we can anticipate and we can make some guesses.
So one thing that ties into that I think is incredibly important is to recognize that there has been a shift of power. And as an individual, if I'm still operating in a simple environment where my employer gives me the training that I need, tells me what the skills I need, et cetera, I'm probably not operating in a world that exists anymore, or at least not generally speaking. And so I think I have a responsibility to take that power to myself, even if I don't know what to do with it, and start deciding, what do I want to become an expert in? What do I want to major in? What do I want to focus? What are my core missions? Everybody talks about Simon Sinek. What is my why? What drives me at a fundamental level? And how do I express that in this changed world? So I think that we've got to empower ourselves. And so when people are responding with, I don't know what to do, it's like we do have to acknowledge that, and we do have to get people through that. But we want to transition them into a situation where they feel empowered to act and have a sense of confidence that it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay because I have skills and I am a capable person.
Yeah.
The one shift, and it was kind of touched on there a little bit, but the one shift that I'm loving right now is all the people that work for an organization where the organization thinks IT is a bunch of guys down in the basement with Coke cans stacked on their desks, and they stick a floppy in every once in a while, and they don't realize the power and impact of enterprise products. I think we have changed a few minds unintentionally given what they had to mobilize in the last couple of weeks. And maybe we can keep on that path of them really realizing digital is the business, not just it is an enabler to be able to have a business for many organizations right now. And silence.
I just that was that moment of calm that you just step into. It's like, this is it. This is the moment.
This is the moment.
You know, so I think Doug's question that he just tossed out there, really, to do it justice, I think we need to put that on our agenda for the next conversation.
I think so.
To be very, because it's an enormous, I mean, we have to take a breath and take a whole nother hour to address that.
Yep.
So it's a really good point. And for those of you who aren't seeing it, it's like, but what will IT do with this realization, both as a department, as an organization, and as IT professionals and individuals? What do we do? What is the next step? How do we keep the learning going?
Love that. Great question, Doug.
Thanks, Doug. Be that way.
And as an organization, I'm with you. Absolutely. We need the organization to support that move.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Simone has a question for us all.
I think I always like ending on a feel good. So what made you laugh this week, Mr. Sanker?
What made me laugh this week?
Yeah.
Wow. There's some there's some incredibly good memes that are going around. I'm going to see if I can find you one, because
while you're looking for that, what made you laugh this week, Patti?
What made me laugh this week? Well, actually, it was a client, and it made me laugh because it's so absurd. We don't need organizational change management right now. We need to put you on hold because we're going through so much change.
That beats mine. That beats mine. Thank you, Patti.
That's really cool. What's yours, Greg? What have you got?
So mine is a meme of. So my social media is full of people who are trying to keep up, and it says, "I hope the weather is good tomorrow for my trip to Puerto Vallarta. I'm getting really tired of lost living room."
Nice.
Indeed.
Some people just have a great sense of humor. That's awesome.
So what made me laugh this week, of course, is my ever entertaining dogs. I'm sure a lot of us are going through a period now where our pets are our best pals, and cats, dogs, birds, whatever we have, are entertaining us and keeping us interested and aware that there's more than us in the world. So I'd like to end on this thought, which I also saw. It's also a meme, and it says, this is from somebody named Dave Hollis, who I don't know. In the rush to return to normal, use this time to consider which parts of normal are worth rushing back to. And I think that's your food for thought for this time. And thanks for joining in the conversation. We'll be back at this. This recording will be posted on YouTube later on the KTLO Learning channel. And we'll be back probably a week from today. And we'll keep you all posted.
And Doug, bring the Cabernet with you.
Yes.
Bring your own bar.
Thanks for joining us today. You guys rock.
Everyone.
Thanks for all the comments and questions and contributions. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.